The Baron hired her as translator for his dead wife's letters. Each one revealed she wasn't who he thought. The rain had been falling on Asheville, North Carolina for 3 days straight when Claire Reeves pulled her aging Honda into the circular drive of Blackwood Estate. October mist clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains beyond, and the mansion, a sprawling stone structure from the 1920s, looked like something out of a Gothic novel. She checked the address twice. This couldn't be right. The job posting had been simple: translate personal letters from French to English, flexible hours, generous pay. It hadn't mentioned anything about the estate that belonged in a period drama. Before we continue with Claire's story, I'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to hear about the places you're calling home. Now back to Claire and the mystery waiting for her behind those imposing doors. Claire was 28 and drowning in student loans from her master's degree in French literature. She'd been cobbling together income from teaching ESL classes online and doing translation work for legal firms. Dry, tedious contracts that paid the bills but killed her soul. This job had appeared on a freelance board 3 days ago. The pay was almost too good to believe: $5,000 to translate approximately 40 letters, with a possible bonus if completed within 6 weeks. She pressed the doorbell and heard it echo inside. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp grey eyes that assessed Claire in a single sweep. "Miss Reeves?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Margaret Walsh, the house manager. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." She stepped aside, and Claire entered a foyer with marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than Claire's entire year's rent. "This way, please." They walked through hallways lined with oil paintings and antique furniture. Claire's sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished wood floors, and she felt acutely aware of her thrift store blazer and the coffee stain she'd tried to hide with strategic scarf placement. Margaret led her to a study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk positioned before French doors that overlooked the rain-soaked gardens. A man stood at those doors, his back to them. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, with dark hair touched with grey at the temples. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, casual for someone who lived in a place like this. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Reeves is here." He turned, and Claire felt her breath catch slightly. He had the kind of face that carried weight. Strong features marked by obvious grief, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a tension in his jaw that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. But it was his eyes that struck her most: deep brown, intelligent, and desperately sad. "Thank you, Margaret." His voice was low, cultured but not pretentious, southern but educated, the kind of accent that came from old money that had sent its children to northern universities. "Miss Reeves, thank you for coming. I'm James Blackwood." He didn't extend his hand, and Claire got the impression he wasn't comfortable with physical contact. She nodded. "Call me Claire, please." "Claire." He gestured to a leather chair before the desk. "Please sit. Can Margaret bring you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "I'm fine, thank you." Margaret withdrew, closing the door with a soft click. James moved to the desk, but didn't sit. He seemed restless, picking up a fountain pen and setting it down again. "I should explain the situation," he said finally. "My wife, Isabel, passed away 7 months ago. Brain aneurysm. She was 39 years old." His voice was steady, but Claire heard the grief underneath, raw and unprocessed. "She was French. We met in Paris 15 years ago when I was there for business. She moved here after we married." Claire waited, sensing there was more. "After she died, I was going through her things. Her parents wanted some items shipped to Lyon, and I found a box of letters in the back of her closet. They're all in French, and they span the last 12 years. I never knew she was writing them or receiving them." He finally looked directly at Claire. I need to know what they say. My French is functional at best. I can order in restaurants and have simple conversations, but these letters, they're personal, intimate. I tried using translation apps, but the results were nonsensical. I need someone who understands the nuances. Of course, Claire said, I can do that. There's something else. James picked up a folder from the desk and opened it, revealing a stack of aged envelopes. I've read enough to know that whatever these letters contain, they're going to change how I understood my wife. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, but I need to know the truth. I need you to be completely honest in your translations. Don't soften anything or try to protect me. Can you do that? Claire met his eyes. There was something almost vulnerable in the question, a man bracing himself for pain, but choosing it anyway. I can do that. I'll translate them exactly as written. Good. He pushed the folder toward her. You can work here in the study, or if you prefer, there's a conservatory at the back of the house that's quieter. I'll stay out of your way. As you finish each letter, just leave the translation on the desk. I'm paying you $5,000 for the complete set, as stated in the posting, with a $2,000 bonus if you finish within a month. $7,000. Claire could pay off 2 credit cards and have enough left over to cover rent for 3 months. That's very generous. It's a difficult task. I want you to know you're being compensated fairly for the emotional labor as well as the linguistic work. He pulled out a contract. This includes a non-disclosure agreement. What you read in these letters stays confidential. I won't ask you to lie if someone directly questions you, but I expect discretion. Claire read the contract carefully. It was straightforward, fair even. She signed. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow, if possible. Margaret will give you a key to the side entrance. The alarm code is written on this card. Come and go as you need to. I work from home, but I'm often in meetings in the East Wing. Margaret is usually here during the day if you need anything. Claire took the key and the card, feeling like she'd just stepped into a situation far more complicated than a simple translation job. But $7,000 was $7,000, and she was curious now. What secrets had Isabel Blackwood kept from her husband? That night, in her small apartment in downtown Asheville, Claire couldn't stop thinking about James Blackwood. There was something heartbreaking about the way he'd asked her to be honest, like he was choosing truth, even though it would hurt. She wondered what kind of marriage they'd had, what kind of woman Isabel had been. The next morning, Claire arrived at Blackwood Estate at 9 o'clock. The rain had stopped, but the mountains were still shrouded in mist. Margaret let her in and showed her to the conservatory, a beautiful glass-enclosed room filled with plants and wicker furniture, with a small desk positioned to overlook the gardens. "Mr. Blackwood left these for you," Margaret said, placing the folder of letters on the desk along with a laptop, a notebook, and a French-English dictionary. "He said to work at your own pace. I'll bring lunch around noon if you're still here." "Thank you." Alone in the conservatory, Claire opened the folder and spread the letters out in chronological order based on the postmarks. The earliest was dated 12 years ago, just 3 years after James and Isabel had married. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, the kind of penmanship taught in French schools. All of the letters were from Isabel to someone named M, and based on the tone, M was a close friend, possibly a sister or cousin. Claire picked up the first letter and began to translate. "Ma chère M. I've been in America for 3 years now, and I still feel like a stranger in this place. James is good to me. He's kind, attentive, everything I should want in a husband. But you know the truth. You've always known it. I married him because I had to, because Papa made it impossible to stay in Lyon. James doesn't know about Luke. He doesn't know I was pregnant when I met him in Paris. He doesn't know that I lost the baby 3 weeks before our wedding and never told him it wasn't his." Claire stopped reading, her heart pounding. She read the paragraph again to make sure she hadn't mistranslated. No, it was clear. Isabel had been pregnant by another man when she met James. She'd lost the baby, but let James believe she'd miscarried their child. This was going to destroy him. Claire spent the next 3 hours on that first letter alone, making sure every word was precise. Isabel wrote about feeling trapped, about missing France, about the guilt of deceiving James, but also the gratitude for his financial support and the stability he provided. She wrote about Luc, apparently a musician in Lyon whom her father had disapproved of, and how she'd never stopped loving him, even though she'd chosen the security James offered. By the time Claire finished the translation, her hands were shaking slightly. She printed it out, placed it in a manila folder, and left it on James's desk as instructed. Then she went home, feeling like she'd just lit a fuse on something explosive. The next morning, James was waiting in the conservatory when Claire arrived. He looked worse than he had 2 days ago, if that was possible. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was holding a coffee cup with white knuckles. The translated letter sat on the desk between them. "Is this accurate?" His voice was rough. "Yes, I double-checked every sentence." He nodded slowly, not looking at her. "Continue with the rest, please." "Mr. Blackwood, James," he said quietly, "if we're going to get through this, we should at least be on a first-name basis. James, are you sure you want to continue? These letters, they might contain things that I need to know." He finally looked at her, and the raw pain in his eyes made Claire's chest ache. "For 7 months, I've been grieving a woman I thought I knew. If I didn't know her at all, I need to understand that. I need to know who I was married to." Claire understood. It was about truth, even when truth was agonizing. "Okay, I'll continue." He left, and Claire picked up the second letter. Over the next week, a routine developed. Claire would arrive each morning, translate 2 or 3 letters, and leave the translations on James's desk. She never saw him during this time. He was apparently deliberately avoiding her, but she could feel his presence in the house. Sometimes she'd hear his voice from the East Wing, conducting business calls. Once she heard what sounded like something heavy being thrown, followed by silence. The letters painted an increasingly complicated picture of Isabel Blackwood. She'd been desperately unhappy in the first years of her marriage, feeling isolated in Asheville and resentful of the life she'd had to leave behind in France. But the letters also revealed that she'd been more calculating than James had known. She'd deliberately gotten pregnant to force her father's hand when he'd forbidden her from seeing Luc. When she'd miscarried, she'd seen an opportunity in James, a wealthy American businessman who'd been charmed by her in Paris and had been pursuing her for months. But the letters also showed evolution. By the 5th year of marriage, Isabel's tone had changed. She wrote less about Luc and more about James, about unexpected moments of connection, about realizing that kindness and stability might be their own form of love. She wrote about feeling guilty for the deception, but also about being afraid to tell the truth. "I think I'm starting to love him, Not the passionate, desperate love I felt for Luc, but something quieter, something that feels like it might last. James is patient with my moods. He doesn't demand that I be someone I'm not. He gave me the conservatory because I mentioned once that I missed my mother's greenhouse in Lyon. He learned to make bœuf bourguignon because it's my favorite. These small kindnesses have accumulated into something I didn't expect. I'm afraid to tell him the truth now because I don't want to lose this." Claire found herself invested in this story in a way she hadn't expected. She'd start each letter dreading what she might find, but increasingly she found herself hoping for evidence of genuine love, for proof that Isabel and James had built something real despite the deceptive foundation. On the 8th day, Margaret found Claire crying quietly in the conservatory. She'd just finished translating a letter from year 10 of the marriage, in which Isabel had written, "I love him, M." I love James with a depth I didn't think I was capable of. I wish I could tell him the truth about how we began, but I'm terrified. What if he leaves me? What if he looks at me with disgust instead of love? I've built a life on a lie, and now that life is the only thing I want. The irony is devastating. Are you all right, dear? Margaret's voice was gentle. Claire wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, this is unprofessional. Nonsense. You're translating a woman's heart. That's not something you can do without feeling it. Margaret sat down in the wicker chair across from the desk. How far have you gotten? Year 10. There are about 15 letters left. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Mr. Blackwood isn't eating. He's barely sleeping. I'm worried about him. I'm worried too, Claire admitted, but he says he needs to know. He does, Margaret agreed, but he also needs someone to remind him to be human while he's learning these things. He's isolating himself, and that's not healthy. She looked at Claire with those sharp grey eyes. Would you be willing to take dinner with him tonight? I'll prepare something light. In the conservatory, casual, just 2 people sharing a meal. I don't think he wants company. I think he needs it more than he wants it, Margaret said firmly, and I think you might be the only person who can understand what he's going through right now. You're reading the same story he is. That evening, Claire stayed later than usual. At 7 o'clock, Margaret appeared with a tray containing 2 bowls of French onion soup, a baguette, a salad, and a bottle of red wine. She set it up on the small table in the conservatory, then went to fetch James. He appeared 5 minutes later, looking startled to see Claire still there. Margaret said... He stopped, seeing the table. Did she ambush you into this? Completely, Claire said. But the soup smells amazing, and I haven't had a real meal in days. So if you're willing to tolerate my company, I'm willing to tolerate yours. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The first she'd seen from him. When you put it like that... He sat down across from her. I'm sorry, I've been avoiding you. It's not personal. I know, this is... a lot. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The soup was perfect, rich and savory, and the wine was probably more expensive than Claire's monthly grocery budget. Finally, James spoke. Do they get better? The letters? Claire considered her answer carefully. They get more honest, and yes, in some ways, better. She loved you, James. That comes through very clearly in the later letters. But she lied to me for 15 years. Yes. He appreciated the honesty, she could tell. Did she ever plan to tell me? I don't know. I haven't translated all of them yet. James poured them both more wine. Tell me about yourself. I hired you based on credentials and recommendations, but I realized I know nothing about you except that you have a master's degree in French literature, and you're drowning in student debt like every other millennial with a humanities degree. Claire laughed despite herself. That's a pretty accurate summary. I grew up in Tennessee, small town. My mother was a high school French teacher, and I grew up speaking it at home. I fell in love with Flaubert and Dumas in college, and made the questionable decision to pursue graduate work. Now I translate legal contracts and teach ESL to pay rent. Do you enjoy it? The teaching sometimes, the contracts, never. This job, though... She paused. This is hard, but it feels meaningful, like I'm helping you find truth, even if the truth is painful. Truth is always meaningful, James said quietly, even when it destroys you. They talked for another hour, carefully avoiding the subject of Isabel's letters. James told her about his work. He managed investments for several high-net-worth clients and did consulting for tech startups. He'd inherited Blackwood Estate from his grandfather and had planned to sell it, but Isabel had loved it so much that he'd kept it for her. Now I'm not sure what to do with it, he admitted. It feels like a mausoleum. It's beautiful, Claire said, but I can see how it might feel haunted. Exactly. He refilled their wine glasses again. I keep waiting for her to walk around a corner, to hear her practicing piano in the music room. She played Chopin when she was anxious. The house is too quiet now. Claire saw the grief in his face, the genuine love despite the betrayal he was learning about. You really loved her? I did. I do. Even knowing what I know now, I still love her. Is that pathetic? No, Claire said softly. It's human. When Claire left that night, slightly tipsy and feeling more connected to James Blackwood than she had any right to, she knew she was crossing a line from professional distance into something more dangerous. But she couldn't seem to help it. The next morning, she returned to the letters with new determination. The letters from years 11 through 13 showed Isabel grappling with her secret in increasingly desperate terms. She'd started therapy, something she hid from James, telling him she was joining a book club, and her therapist had apparently encouraged her to tell James the truth. But Isabel couldn't bring herself to do it. I'm a coward, Em. That's what it comes down to. I'm too afraid of losing what I have to risk honesty. My therapist says I'm living in a prison of my own making, that I'll never be truly free until I tell James the truth. But what if the truth destroys us? What if he can never forgive me? I'd rather live with the guilt than without him. Claire translated this letter on a Tuesday morning, and when she emerged from the conservatory for lunch, she found James in the kitchen with Margaret. He was eating a sandwich, the first time she'd seen him eat anything substantial, and talking about business matters. He looked marginally better, like he'd slept a full night for the first time in weeks. "Claire," he said when he saw her, "join us?" She did, and they fell into an easy conversation about nothing important: the weather, the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, a new restaurant opening downtown. It felt normal, comfortable, and Claire realized with a start that she looked forward to seeing him each day. Not just because of the paycheck, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. This was becoming a problem. That evening, Margaret orchestrated another dinner in the conservatory. This time, James didn't look surprised. He brought the wine himself and asked Claire about her favorite French authors. They debated the merits of Proust versus Camus while eating coq au vin, and for a few hours, the weight of Isabel's letters seemed to lift from both of them. "I never had conversations like this with Isabel," James admitted as they lingered over coffee. She hated talking about literature. She said it reminded her too much of her father. He was a professor at Lyon, very demanding, very critical. She rebelled against anything intellectual. What did you talk about? Travel, mostly. Food. She loved trying new restaurants, planning trips to places we'd never been. She was spontaneous, impulsive. She'd wake up on a Saturday morning and decide we needed to drive to Charleston for oysters. She kept life interesting. You miss that. I do, but I also... He hesitated. I'm realizing there were entire parts of her internal life I never saw. She never told me about the therapy, about struggling with her past. She kept it all hidden. Maybe she was trying to protect you. Or maybe she didn't trust me enough to be vulnerable. He looked at Claire across the table. These dinners we've been having, these conversations, I find myself being more honest with you than I ever was with her. Is that terrible? I think it's human, Claire said, echoing his words from their first dinner. Grief is complicated. So is learning that someone you loved had secrets. James reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her, and Claire felt electricity shoot through her arm. Thank you, he said quietly, for doing this, for being honest, for having dinner with me even though I'm paying you to do a job, not to be my therapist. I'm not your therapist, Claire said, very aware of his hand on hers. I'm just someone who happens to be reading the same story you are. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Claire saw something shift in his expression, a recognition, a possibility. Then he released her hand and stood up. I should let you go home. It's late. But as Claire drove back to her apartment that night, she knew something had changed between them. They'd crossed an invisible line, and there was no going back to simple professional distance. The next week brought a cold snap to Asheville. Early November frost coated the gardens at Blackwood Estate, and Claire started arriving with gloves and a heavy jacket. She'd translated through year 14 of the letters now, and the pattern continued. Isabel wrestling with guilt but unable to confess, finding happiness with James but feeling like a fraud. Then came the letter from 15 years into the marriage, dated just 4 months before Isabel's death. Claire read it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly, her heart pounding. M, I've made a decision. I'm going to tell James everything. You were right. I can't live like this anymore. The guilt is eating me alive, and I've realized that what we have isn't real as long as it's built on lies. He deserves to know the truth about Luke, about the pregnancy, about why I really married him. I'm terrified, but I love him too much to keep living this lie. I'm going to tell him this weekend. We're going to the cabin in the mountains, just the 2 of us. I'll tell him there, away from the house and all its expectations. Pray for me, Em. Pray that he can forgive me. Pray that love is stronger than deception. The cabin in the mountains. Claire's hands were shaking. She knew what had happened that weekend. She'd looked it up after James first mentioned how Isabel died. They'd been at their mountain cabin near Boone when she'd collapsed. James had called 911, but she was gone before the ambulance arrived. A ruptured aneurysm, sudden and catastrophic. Isabel had been about to confess. She'd died before she could tell James the truth. Claire printed the translation with trembling hands. This changed everything. Isabel hadn't chosen to die with her secrets. She'd chosen honesty, and fate had intervened. She found James in his office on a conference call. He saw her face and immediately told whoever was on the line that he had to go. What is it? Claire handed him the folder. You need to read this one now. He read it in silence, his face going pale. When he finished, he set the paper down carefully and stared at it for a long moment. She was going to tell me. Yes. That weekend at the cabin, she died before she could... His voice broke and he covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook and Claire realized he was crying. She moved around the desk without thinking and put her hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry. All this time, he said, his voice muffled, I've been angry at her for keeping secrets. But she was going to tell me. She chose honesty. She just ran out of time. Claire didn't know what to say. She kept her hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort as James processed this revelation. Finally, he lowered his hands and looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. Are there more letters after this one? Yes, about 6 more. Written after that weekend? Claire shook her head. Before. The next one is dated 3 weeks before that trip. It looks like she wrote them out of order, or these were older letters M returned to her for some reason. James stood up, and suddenly they were very close, Claire's hand still on his shoulder. She could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the grief and confusion and something else, something that made her breath catch. Claire, he said softly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Am I imagining that something is happening between us? Her heart hammered. This was the moment where she should lie, should protect them both from crossing this line. But James had asked for honesty, and she'd promised to give it. No, you're not imagining it. I'm still in love with my dead wife. I'm grieving and confused, and probably not in any state to make good decisions. I know, and you're 28 to my 44. You're an employee. There's a power imbalance. I'm aware of all of that, Claire said quietly, which is why I've been trying very hard not to feel what I'm feeling. How's that working for you? Terribly. James laughed despite himself, a broken sound that somehow felt right. What do we do? I don't know, but I think we need to finish the letters first. You need to understand the complete story before you can move forward with anything. He nodded slowly. You're right. That's the right thing to do." But neither of them moved. They stood there in his office, close enough that Claire could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then James stepped back. "I'll read this translation tonight. Continue with the rest tomorrow." "Okay." Claire left his office on unsteady legs. She was falling for James Blackwood, and it was the worst possible timing, the worst possible situation. He was her employer, he was grieving, he was 16 years older than her, and she was being paid to uncover his dead wife's secrets. There was no good way for this to end. But her heart didn't seem to care about logistics. The remaining letters painted a poignant picture of Isabel's final months. She'd been preparing herself emotionally to confess, writing about her fears and hopes, about the love she'd found with James, and her desperation to finally build their marriage on truth. She'd written to M about planning the perfect moment, about rehearsing what she would say, about imagining both forgiveness and rejection. "If he leaves me, M, I'll understand. I've earned that. But I'm choosing to believe in the strength of what we've built together. I'm choosing to believe that 15 years of genuine love can withstand the revelation of how we began. I'm choosing hope over fear." Claire finished the final letter on a Friday afternoon in mid-November. The translation was complete. Isabel's story was now fully told. She found James in the library, staring at the fireplace. He looked better than he had weeks ago. The shadows under his eyes had faded, and there was a calmness about him that hadn't been there before. "It's done," Claire said, handing him the last folder. "That's all of them." He took the folder but didn't open it. "Sit with me." They sat together on the leather sofa facing the fireplace. James opened the folder and read the final translation in silence. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. "She loved me," he said finally. "That's what matters, isn't it? Not how we started, but where we ended up. She loved me enough to risk everything by telling the truth. Yes. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd had the chance to tell her it wouldn't have mattered, that I would have forgiven her." "Would you have?" Claire asked gently. James considered this. "I think so. Maybe not immediately. Maybe I would have been angry, felt betrayed. But eventually, yes, because I loved her. Love doesn't disappear because the foundation was messy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. Then James said, "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been avoiding." Claire's heart skipped. "Okay." "I knew. Not about Luke, not about the pregnancy. But I knew she'd married me for practical reasons rather than love. I wasn't stupid, Claire. When we met in Paris, she was vulnerable and desperate. Her French was too perfect to pass for someone in love with my mediocre attempts at romance. She needed a way out of whatever situation she was in, and I provided that." "Then why did you marry her?" "Because I thought love could grow. Because I believed that choosing each other day after day could build something real even if the foundation wasn't ideal. And I was right. It did grow. But I never told her that I knew she'd married me for practical reasons, and she never told me why she needed to marry at all. We had parallel secrets." Claire absorbed this. "You weren't just victim in this story." "No, I was complicit in the deception. I let her believe I was completely naive, that I'd bought her act entirely. I wanted her to love me eventually, so I pretended not to see her initial calculation. We were both liars, just about different things." "That's very mature of you to realize." James laughed softly. "It's taken me 7 months and 40 letters to get here. I'm not sure I deserve credit for maturity." He turned to face her. "Claire, I need to know something. These feelings between us, are they real? Or am I just transferring my grief onto someone convenient?" "I don't know," Claire said honestly. "Maybe both, maybe neither. But I know I look forward to seeing you every day. I know I think about you when I'm not here. I know I care about whether you eat and sleep and heal. That's not nothing, no, but it's also not enough to build a relationship on, not yet. What would be enough? Claire thought carefully. Time, distance from this situation. You need to grieve Isabel properly now that you know the complete truth. I need to finish this job and step back so you can have clarity. If what we feel is real, it'll still be there in a few months. And if it's not, then we'll have saved ourselves from a mistake. James reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender that Claire felt tears prick her eyes. You're very wise for 28. I've made enough mistakes to learn from. Will you have dinner with me tonight? One last time before you step back and give me space? Yes. That evening, Margaret outdid herself. She prepared duck confit, roasted vegetables, and a chocolate soufflé that was probably sinful. James opened a bottle of wine from his cellar that he said he'd been saving for a special occasion. Is this a special occasion? Claire asked. It's the end of one story, and possibly the beginning of another. I think that qualifies. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. James told her about his childhood in Asheville, about his grandfather who'd built Blackwood Estate, about his decision to stay in North Carolina rather than move to New York like most of his business school classmates. Claire told him about growing up in a small Tennessee town where everyone knew everyone's business, about her complicated relationship with her own mother, who'd wanted her to be a French teacher like her, but had been disappointed when Claire chose literature instead. She died 3 years ago, Claire said. Lung cancer. We were in a weird place when it happened. Not estranged, but not close either. I wish I'd had more time to fix that. I'm sorry, James said. That's hard. The thing is, I understand Isabel a little better now. Sometimes we keep secrets because we're afraid of disappointing the people we love. Sometimes the lie feels safer than the truth. But the truth is always better in the end. Usually. Not always immediately, but eventually. As the evening wound down, James walked Claire to her car. The November air was crisp and cold, and their breath fogged in the darkness. At her car door, James caught her hand. I'm going to pay you the full amount plus the bonus, $7,000. You've earned it. Thank you. And I'm going to ask you not to come back for a while. Not because I don't want to see you, but because you're right. I need time to process all of this without the complication of whatever is developing between us. How long? Give me until after Christmas. That's 6 weeks. If I still feel the same way about you then, if you still feel the same way about me, we'll have dinner again. We'll see if this is real. Claire nodded, her throat tight. Okay. But Claire, I need you to know something. He cupped her face with both hands, and his eyes were very serious. I think it's real. I think you're the first person in years I've been completely honest with, and that matters. I think you've saved me from drowning in grief and lies and confusion. Whatever happens, thank you for that. You're welcome, Claire whispered. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, a kiss that tasted like wine and promise and goodbye all at once. It was over in a moment, but Claire felt it all the way to her toes. Then he stepped back and opened her car door for her. 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Claire agreed. She drove home with tears streaming down her face, not entirely sure whether they were sad or happy tears. Maybe both. Maybe it was possible to feel heartbreak and hope at the same time. The 6 weeks between mid-November and late December were the longest of Claire's life. James kept his word about not contacting her, and Claire kept hers about giving him space. She threw herself into work, picking up extra translation contracts and teaching more ESL classes. She paid off her credit cards and put money aside for rent. She tried not to think about James Blackwood every waking moment and mostly failed. The week before Christmas, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Claire, it's Margaret Walsh." Claire's heart jumped. "Is James okay?" "He's fine, dear. Well, physically fine. Emotionally, he's been morose and insufferable, but that's why I'm calling." She sounded amused. "He won't admit it, but he's miserable without you. He wanders around the estate like a ghost, working too much and sleeping too little. I can't take it anymore." "Margaret, we agreed to give it time." "I know what you agreed to, and it was very noble and mature. But I'm an old woman who's worked for the Blackwood family for 35 years, and I've learned that sometimes noble and mature is code for unnecessarily painful. That man loves you, Claire. He's been in love with you since the 3rd week you were here. And unless I'm badly mistaken, you love him too." Claire's breath caught. Love. Was that what this was? It's complicated. Love is always complicated, but it's also always worth it. Now I'm hosting Christmas Eve dinner at the estate. Just family, me, my husband James, and a few other staff members who've become family over the years. I'd like you to come. Margaret, I don't think... James doesn't know I'm inviting you. It'll be a surprise. If you come and he's unhappy about it, you can leave. But I think you'll find he's very happy indeed. Please, dear, give him the gift of hope for Christmas." Claire thought about the past 6 weeks, about the hollow feeling in her chest every morning when she woke up, about how she'd started 3 separate texts to James and deleted them all. She thought about his kiss in the darkness, about the honesty they'd shared, about the way he'd looked at her when he'd said he thought it was real. "What time should I come?" 6 o'clock. And Claire, wear something festive. Christmas Eve at Blackwood Estate was like something from a movie. The mansion was decorated with garlands and lights, and a massive tree dominated the foyer. Claire arrived at 6 o'clock in a dark green dress she'd found at a consignment shop, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Margaret answered the door with a conspiratorial smile. "He's in the music room. Go on." Claire walked through the familiar hallways, following the sound of piano music. Chopin, she realized. The same music Isabel had played when she was anxious. She found James at the grand piano, his back to the door, his fingers moving over the keys with surprising grace. The music was melancholy and beautiful, and Claire stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. He must have sensed her presence, because he stopped playing and turned around. When he saw her, his expression went through a series of rapid changes. Surprise, confusion, hope, joy. Claire. He stood up so fast he knocked the piano bench back. "What are you... Did Margaret, that meddling woman? She called me, said you were being insufferable." "I'm not... Okay, maybe I am." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just in front of her. He was close enough to touch, but not touching, like he was afraid she might disappear if he reached for her. "It's been 6 weeks. I know. I've thought about you every single day. Me too. I've written you letters I never sent. Started calling you at least 12 times and chickened out every time." Claire smiled through sudden tears. "Why? Because I was afraid it wasn't real, afraid I'd just been using you to process my grief about Isabel. But Claire, I went to therapy, real therapy, 3 times a week. I've done the work to separate my grief from my feelings for you, and the grief is lessening, but my feelings for you are stronger than ever." "Tell me," Claire whispered. "I'm in love with you. I'm in love with your intelligence and your honesty and the way you cry over other people's love letters. I'm in love with how you called me out when I needed it and comforted me when I was breaking. I'm in love with the way you pronounce certain French words and how you gesture when you're passionate about something. I'm in love with all of it. James, I know it's too fast. I know I'm probably rebounding from my wife's death. I know there's an age difference, and that you were my employee, and that this whole situation is messy and complicated. But I don't care. I want messy and complicated with you. I want to see if this thing between us can grow into something permanent. Will you give me that chance?" Claire had come here knowing she would say yes. She'd known it the moment Margaret called, maybe even known it that night 6 weeks ago when James kissed her goodbye. But she needed to say one thing first. I loved translating Isabel's letters, not because of the money or because they were interesting linguistically, but because they showed me how complicated love can be, how it can start with lies and grow into truth, how it can survive secrets and misunderstandings, how it can be both broken and whole at the same time. Those letters taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other over and over again, despite the mess. "And?" James asked, his voice rough with emotion. "And I choose you. I choose this. Whatever it is, whatever it becomes, I'm in." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and had finally found air. Claire kissed him back with 6 weeks of longing, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on tight. This was real, this was right. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and smiling. "Merry Christmas," James said. "Merry Christmas." Margaret's voice came from the doorway, smug and satisfied. "Dinner's ready, and you're welcome, by the way." They laughed and followed her to the dining room, where a small group of people welcomed them with knowing smiles. Over dinner, a traditional southern spread with a French twist that would have made Isabel happy, James kept Claire's hand in his under the table. They told the story of how they'd met, carefully editing out the more painful parts, and accepted the gentle teasing about office romances and age differences with good humor. Later, after dinner, James gave Claire a tour of the parts of the estate she'd never seen. He showed her the portrait gallery, with paintings of Blackwood ancestors dating back to the 1800s, the library where he'd spent his childhood reading adventure novels, the tower room with views of the mountains. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to a room on the 3rd floor she'd never entered. It was a study, smaller than his main office, with a desk positioned before windows overlooking the gardens. On the desk was a box. "These are Isabel's letters, the originals. I want you to have them." Claire looked at him in surprise. "James, those are personal. They're part of our story now, yours and mine. They brought us together. I think Isabel would appreciate the irony. Her letters about keeping secrets from me ended up helping me find honesty with someone else." He took Claire's hands. "I'm not trying to replace her. I loved her, and I'll always love her in some way. But I'm also ready to move forward. With you. What about the house? You said it felt like a mausoleum. I want to fill it with life again. With you, if you're willing. I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow. We can take this slow, do it right. But eventually, I'd like to see your books on these shelves and hear your footsteps in these halls. I'd like to have dinners in the conservatory where we first fell in love. I'd like to make new memories here." Claire thought about the massive estate, about the life of privilege it represented, about how far it was from her small apartment and her struggling existence. A year ago, she would have said it was impossible. But a year ago, she hadn't been hired to translate a dead woman's secrets. She hadn't fallen in love with a grieving widower who taught her that honesty was always better than comfort. "I'd like that too," she said, "not immediately, but eventually. Let's take our time and do this right. However long you need." They sealed the promise with a kiss, there in the tower room with the mountains beyond, and Isabel's letters bearing witness. It felt like an ending and a beginning simultaneously, the close of one story and the opening of another. Spring came to Asheville with a riot of color. The dogwoods bloomed, the rhododendrons burst into flower, and the mountains turned green and lush. Claire had been dating James for 4 months now, and they'd taken it slow as promised. Dinners several times a week, walks in the Biltmore Gardens, trips to the farmers' market on Saturday mornings. They'd introduced each other to friends. James's business associates welcomed Claire with cautious warmth, and her teacher friends were slightly intimidated by James, but eventually charmed by his dry humour. The Blackwood estate staff had adopted Claire as one of their own. Margaret, in particular, had become a friend and confidant, someone Claire could call when she was nervous about the age difference or uncertain about whether she belonged in James's world. "You belong wherever you choose to belong," Margaret had told her firmly. "Money and estates don't define worth, dear. Character does, and you have character in spades." In March, they'd taken their first trip together, a week in Charleston where they'd eaten oysters, walked the historic district, and stayed in a bed and breakfast overlooking the harbour. It was there, on a balcony at sunset, that James first said he loved her outside of that Christmas Eve confession. "I love you," he'd said simply, taking her hand. "I wanted to say it somewhere beautiful, somewhere away from all the history and complications. I wanted you to know that this love isn't connected to grief or guilt or anything else. It's just us." "I love you too," Claire had said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. Now, in April, they'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. Claire had given up her apartment and moved into the carriage house on the estate grounds, a compromise that gave her independence while keeping them close. She'd turned the upper floor into a translation studio where she worked during the day, taking on higher-paying literary translation projects now that she had the financial breathing room to be selective. She'd even started translating a novel by a contemporary French author, work that fed her soul in a way legal contracts never had. James had started a foundation in Isabel's name to support arts education in Asheville schools, a way of honoring her memory while moving forward. Claire helped with the French correspondence, and together they'd attended the foundation's first fundraiser, a gala at the Biltmore where they'd danced together for the first time. "You're a terrible dancer," Claire had teased. "I know. Isabel used to complain about it constantly. But you seem to tolerate me anyway." "I more than tolerate you." On a Saturday in late April, James asked Claire to meet him in the conservatory. When she arrived, she found the space transformed, candles everywhere, roses in vases, and classical music playing softly. James stood in the centre of it all, wearing a suit and looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "What's all this?" Claire asked, her heart starting to pound. "I've been thinking about Isabel's letters," James said. "About how she wrote that love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing each other over and over again despite the mess. About how it can start with lies and grow into truth. I remember. Our love didn't start with lies. It started with truth. Painful, difficult truth that you helped me face. It started with honesty, and it's grown into something I never expected to have again. Something I don't think I ever had with Isabel, actually. Complete trust. Complete openness." He took a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. Claire's breath caught. "Claire Reeves, I know it's only been 4 months. I know some people will say it's too fast, that I'm rushing because I'm afraid of being alone, that this is rebound from grief. But I know what I feel. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning. I know that I want to build a life with you that's honest and real. I know that I want to fill this house with love and laughter, and maybe someday children who will learn French from their mother and bad dancing from their father." Claire was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I know that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, day after day, through whatever complications and messiness life throws at us. So I'm asking you to choose me. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band with a single sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. It was beautiful and elegant, without being ostentatious. It was perfect. "Yes," Claire said through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." James stood and slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her like the world was ending and beginning all at once. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the conservatory, where they'd first started falling in love, surrounded by flowers and candlelight and the promise of forever. When they finally broke apart, Claire said, "I have to ask, is this ring new or brand new?" James said immediately. "I bought it last week after spending 3 days looking at every jewelry store in Asheville. I wanted something that was just yours, just ours, no ghosts." "I wasn't worried about ghosts. Isabel's letters brought us together. I'll always be grateful for that." "Me too. But this is our story now, our love letter." They spent the rest of the evening planning their future. They decided on a small wedding in June, just family and close friends, in the gardens at Blackwood Estate. They talked about traveling, Paris in the fall, so Claire could show James her favorite parts of the city. They discussed children, maybe 2 eventually, when they were ready. They debated whether to turn some of the estate into a cultural center that could host literary events and language programs. "You realize your life is going to change completely," James said, as they lay together on the conservatory sofa, watching stars appear through the glass ceiling. "You're going to be Claire Blackwood, wife of a wealthy investor, living in a mansion. Some of your friends might treat you differently. I know, but I'm not marrying you for the money or the estate. I'm marrying you because you make me laugh, because you're honest even when honesty hurts, because you chose truth over comfort and growth over stagnation, because you saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway." "That goes both ways," James said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You saw me at my absolute worst, grieving, confused, angry, and you stayed anyway. You helped me find truth when I was drowning in lies and assumptions. We helped each other. Yes, that's what partners do." Margaret found them an hour later, still tangled together on the sofa, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. She took one look at Claire's hand and let out a delighted shriek. "Finally, I was beginning to think you'd never ask her, James." "You knew?" Claire asked. "Dear girl, I've known since March. He came to me asking for advice on rings. I told him to follow his heart and stop overthinking everything." She hugged them both. "I'm so happy for you. Isabel would be happy too, you know. She'd want James to move forward, to find love again." "I think so too," Claire said softly. Over the next 2 months, they planned a wedding that was intimate and perfect. Claire's father walked her down an aisle marked by white roses in the estate gardens. Margaret stood as Claire's matron of honor, having become more mother than employer over the past months. James's college roommate served as best man, giving a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of honesty and partnership, and choosing each other through whatever complications life brought. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Claire like he was sealing a vow that went deeper than words. At the reception in a tent on the lawn, they danced to jazz music while the June sun set over the mountains. Claire's teacher friends mingled with James's business associates, and everyone agreed it was the most romantic wedding they'd ever attended. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Blackwood?" James asked as they swayed together. "Perfect," Claire said. "Terrifying and perfect and absolutely right. That's how the best things in life feel." They honeymooned in Paris, where Claire showed James the bookshops and cafes she'd loved during her graduate school year abroad. They visited the cafe where James had first met Isabel, and rather than being painful, it felt like honoring the past while celebrating the present. They stood on bridges over the Seine and made promises about their future. They ate croissants in bed and made love with the windows open to the sound of Paris waking up. "I'm glad I hired you to translate those letters," James said one morning as they lingered over coffee. "Best job I ever took," Claire agreed, "even though it was messy and complicated and ethically questionable. Especially because of that. The best things in life usually are." They returned to Asheville and moved forward together, building a life that honored both their pasts while creating something entirely new. Claire continued her translation work, eventually publishing her first translated novel to critical acclaim. James expanded the Isabel Blackwood Foundation, and Claire joined the board, helping to bring French language programs to underserved schools. A year after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Marguerite, after Margaret, and as a nod to Claire's French heritage. 2 years later came a son, Henri, the estate that had felt like a mausoleum filled with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. On their 5th anniversary, James gave Claire a leather-bound journal. Inside, on the first page, he'd written, "My dearest Claire, Isabel's letters taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about truth, about choosing each other despite our flaws and complications, about building something real on a foundation of honesty. These pages are for your letters. Not secrets this time, but stories. Stories of our life together, our children, our joys and struggles and ordinary moments. Stories for them to read someday, so they'll know how much their parents loved each other. Love always. James." Claire read it with tears in her eyes, thinking about how far they'd both come. From that rainy October day when she'd pulled up to Blackwood Estate as a struggling translator to this moment, 5 years of marriage, 2 children, and a love that had grown deeper with every challenge they'd faced together. She picked up a pen and began to write, "My dearest family, this is the story of how your father and I fell in love while translating your namesake's letters. It's a story about truth and grief, and choosing each other through the mess. It's a story about how sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most complicated beginnings. It's our love letter to you and to each other, and to the future we're building together." Outside, the June sun shone on the mountains, and somewhere in the house their children were laughing. It was an ordinary moment, and it was perfect. This was what love looked like after all the secrets were revealed, after the grief was processed, after 2 imperfect people chose each other over and over again. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a real one, built on honesty and patience and the courage to embrace complicated truths. Claire closed the journal and went to find her husband, ready to write the next chapter of their story together.